2022 edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series, brought to you by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Kenneth L. Johnson, president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm East Coast Executives. If this is your first time joining us, this is our season finale, but we welcome you. The Digital Career Success Series, DCSS, is a professional development series that helps members of our Urban League Young Professional chapters and other diverse job seekers develop new skill sets that will enhance their careers through digital platforms such as webinars, Facebook Live, and Instagram Live. The goal is to provide an opportunity for professional development right from one's computer. If you want more, please visit nuljobsnetwork.com. All right, we're ready to go today. Today's Digital Career Success Series, Work-Life Balance, features Shayla Turner from Anheuser-Busch. This session is also sponsored by the Anheuser-Busch Foundation. Had the opportunity to sit on a call with Shayla. Couldn't believe her career journey, and I'm sure you'll be excited to learn a little bit about her and her area of expertise in navigating and just understanding the importance of work-life balance. Shayla, welcome to the Digital Career Success Series.
Thank you so much, Ken. It is amazing to be here, and hello to everyone out there. I see the chat blowing up with the good morning. So I don't know where everybody's sitting regionally, but it is about 11 o'clock in St. Louis here. So ready to chat. This is, I spoke with Ken, and this is a very relevant topic for me. So I'm excited to kind of talk about my journey, finding my own work-life balance and all of the stumbles that I had along the way, some big stumbles. So yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to the next hour.
You know what, we look forward to it as well, and we are grateful and thankful to have you on board. Listen, I think we have the best audience in the world, so if you're out there, let us know where you're from. I already see St. Louis checked in, but I knew that was going to happen, right?
Yes.
Wherever you're from, check in, let us know. Hey, listen, don't forget to place your questions in the Q&A. We will have a Q&A after Shayla's presentation, so you can ask some questions, we can talk a little, and we can just celebrate all that is the Digital Career Success Series. Shayla, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's go.
Amazing. Oh, I love all of these cities. Shout out to all of you. Oh my goodness. Well, once again, I am Shayla Turner. So again, thank you so much to the National Urban League for having me host here, and excited to chat with everybody. First and foremost, let's kind of start out a little bit about myself. So I actually am kind of from a lot of different places. So my East Coasters to West Coasters, I got you. So I was actually born and raised in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So I used to be more of an East Coast fan, and, especially with sports and things like that. But right around that high school timeframe, my family moved out to Portland, Oregon. So I went coast to coast. I was in Portland, Oregon through high school and college, graduated college, and then decided, you know what, I'm just going to pack all my stuff up that I could fit in my tiny little Hyundai Tiburon, and sold everything else that didn't fit. And I moved out to Denver, Colorado. Lived in Denver, Colorado for about 5.5 years before returning back home to Oregon. And then, spent a couple of years back in Oregon before coming to St. Louis. So I have been kind of all over the place. So I hope some people share some of my different, oh, hello from Denver. I love that. So a little bit about my background. I did go to University of Oregon, go Ducks. I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Family and Human Services. So for those of you that don't know what that is, it's kind of the more applicable, like social work. It was a lot of practicum and internship, so rather than classroom work. So I was very, very fortunate to get a lot of hands-on experience in my junior and senior year of college, where I got to intern places like the Juvenile Justice Department, Sexual Assault Support Services, HIV Alliance. So did a lot of my practicum to get my degree. That was really, my first, launch of my career. I really wanted to go into the social work realm. I think I'm just kind of an empath at heart, which I figured out very quickly. Maybe social work wasn't the best place for me as an empath. It was definitely hard for me to check out at night, and and sleep. So that is a little bit about my educational background. I'll cover kind of my career journey here in just a little bit, but, hopping a little bit more forward to my present day, I have been with Anheuser-Busch for about 6 years, actually 6 years this month, which is really exciting. Outside of Anheuser-Busch, a couple of things you can see, a couple of photos there, just some important people to me, my partner Quincy and my dog Raja. Just obsessed with both of them. Met them both here in St. Louis when I moved here about 3.5 years ago. My family as well. We love to travel. And I did put a picture of myself near some water, because that is a huge part of my work-life balance. It is water, and just being near the ocean or a lake is something that I really enjoy, and gives me a lot of peace. So as you can see, my professional experience, I'm kind of the poster child for hopping around to a lot of different industries. So really early on, started in more social services and education, transitioned into more of a nonprofit sector. So through my transition of social work, I said, you know what, I want to create my own nonprofit. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then to supplement the social work, because we oftentimes know there's lack of finance and money in that when you're working, I did supplement that with restaurants, which I ended up getting into restaurant management for quite a few years.
Wow.
Transitioned into on and off premise sales. I was in talent acquisition for a couple of years, and then now recently HR business partner. So as you can tell, I've kind of been in quite a few different industries, from nonprofit to corporate sector, social services. So it has been a wild ride, but really fantastic to be here today, through all of those things. So.
But I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you have a team there at AB, like that reports directly to you?
I do not at the moment. This is actually in my previous position in talent acquisition, I did have a team. I don't have direct reports. However, the client group that I support as a people business partner is 450 people. So I like to think that I kind of help to manage, from all the VPs to directors to our entry level. So
yeah, I would imagine that you have a really interesting understanding of the topic here, work-life balance, yes. Just because you've worked in high demanding industries like restaurants, not-for-profits. Like, these are things that aren't 9 to 5s. These are lifestyles. Yes. And it just, I would imagine that just you have an understanding of people and kind of the way they need to handle their career. So I think it would be amazing to work with and for you. So I was just curious.
Well, thank you. That's a huge compliment. It's something that I love about management, and I'll talk about this quite a bit, but I am a huge, again, I think just being an empathic leader and really leading with that. I'm very people first, right? So all of the direct reports that I have had over the years, whether it be, in the restaurants or in my talent acquisition team, or even the folks now, it's so important to understand what people have going on in their lives and really value that and support it. And be that kind of leader that is, that listens and understands that at the end of the day at Anheuser-Busch, we sell beer, right? We're not, performing brain surgery on a table. And, so I think that's something that is so important to me, to really make sure that our employees and my teammates and stuff feel really valued as people first, because ultimately that is really going to drive their success in their own careers and then also for the business, right? So that has always kind of been my go-to when I think about, when I have different conversations and things like that. I've had the opportunity to have, a lot of direct reports that were struggling maybe with something personally. And it was always like, close your laptop, leave work, go take care of you. That is number one to me, because ultimately it's going to make sure that you're invested in yourself, but then also invested in feeling really valued, with the company that you're at. And I think that's the number one priority for me.
All right, definitely. Are you ready to go to the next slide?
Yeah, let's do it. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to warn everybody, I'm going to just get really personal here, because there's no other way to do it for me. I'm just going to walk you through my personal journey and really, especially kind of in those earlier years, how much I personally struggled with work-life balance and how I've gotten to my current state of really being able to find that balance through creating a lot of boundaries for myself. So I talked a little bit about my background in education, right? So I think, when I think about my university time, I was definitely very invested in making sure that I was getting those good grades and really, building out, a good track record for myself as I went into the industry. I was one of those folks that graduated in 2008. So it was definitely a tough time coming out of university, especially in corporate America, going through the recession. But as I transitioned out of university, I did go more into social work, right? So as you can imagine, during a recession, there was a huge need for that. So that university timeframe, you can kind of see my journey here, where I was really kind of focused on life. That so much of university and going to school is focused on life, with kind of the supplement of making sure that, you're doing well in school and things like that. So as I really transitioned out, that's really where I got heavy into the workforce. My earliest career was in middle school, after school practicum and curriculums building. So what I did was worked with middle school youth, oftentimes more female than male, where I would, create after school programs where, folks, if they couldn't go home right away or, just needed some additional support, would kind of create some sort of a program for like 2 or 3 hours after school where, we would do a lot of learning, but then a lot of just supporting, right? A lot of the students that I worked with, maybe did not have the most stable home. So just really giving them a place to be themselves, interact with their other students and things like that. And then, just get that support from me. So that was really what I spent the early parts of my career doing. And that's really when I actually transitioned from Oregon over to Denver. So I did that both in Portland, Oregon, and also Denver, Colorado. And in that transition, I was kind of in that point in my career where I think I was starting to kind of question, is social work really what I want to do? Because even, when I would be with all of these middle school youth, I was so invested that it was really hard for me to shut off at the end of the day. And, I really started kind of thinking like, is this for me in the long term? I was definitely struggling financially, to kind of keep my head above water. So to really supplement that, I ended up getting into the restaurant industry and serving and bartending. I absolutely loved it. It's a huge passion of mine. I love the service industry. Very, very dynamic. So I think for me, that balance of both was great, right? So it was helping me financially. I got to kind of use it as a bit of a de-stressor because I was dealing with a lot of really tough situations with some of these kids. And, I think so for me, it was a balance of the financial aspect, but then also more of like the social aspect as well, and just my emotional health. So through that early career, as you can see, I went head first into work. And I'll pause here because this is really where, I stumbled a lot. I ended up, really from a financial perspective and then also a value perspective, I started really growing up through the service industry where I was going from, server and bartender to lead server and bartender, and then trainer, and then assistant manager, and then assistant GM. And then all of a sudden, our restaurant was so successful that we ended up opening up a second location, and they made me the general manager of that first location to really build the business. And as you can imagine, I don't know if I have any restaurant industry folks here, but it was a lot of work. I was with that company for about 5.5 years. And as a general manager, it was not your average restaurant. It was actually a 3-in-1 concept. So just within, my management, I had 3 front of house managers. We operated 2 separate kitchens. So we were only closed for about 6 hours out of the entire day. So all in all, with my entire team, we had about 75 employees that I managed. And we were busy. It was a very successful restaurant. I think we profited about $1 million in the first year. So, one of those restaurants where you did wait 2.5 hours to get in, for brunch. So as you can imagine, as the GM, I was there a lot. And, I say that I kind of went full force into work because, when I thought about life outside of work, my friends, things like that, it was all invested into that restaurant and that career. And it was something that, I loved until I got out of it and looked back and I said, that probably wasn't a very healthy balance for me. So that was very early in my career, because I started going so full force into the restaurant industry. I kind of had to step away from social work. It was really difficult for me to balance both of those. And at the time in my life, just from a financial perspective, I really needed to make a choice. And for me, that choice was to go into something, that I could really benefit from financially. I was also really enjoying it. And then from a social work perspective, I could kind of do that as my life balance, right? And like starting to volunteer and still be invested in the community, just not in a career way. So that was a big transition for me.
So let's talk about this real quick.
Yeah.
As you were kind of transitioning between really different types of careers, with this being a professional development platform, what are the soft skills or I guess the intangibles that you took from career to career that served you well?
I think that's a fantastic question. And I would almost challenge to say that I don't think the industries are too different from each other. I think there's a lot of intersection, and that's where I really, really developed a lot of my soft skills. Because when you think about social work, and being there for people and being an advocate and listening, developing your different communication skills, that ultimately transitioned into my restaurant life, right? And I think one of my favorite things about a restaurant is you get to impact people's lives in a very different way, right? When people walk in, you get to greet them with a smile. You get to give them the experience. They could go cook at home, right? So we really want to bring that experience and, turn somebody's day around. I think that for me was a huge piece of why the two kind of blended together so well, where they are different industries, but I felt like I was still able to give that impact. So I think, again, the communication is a huge piece, right? When I think about my customers, I think, making sure that people have that experience when things go wrong and you have challenges, making sure that you're just communicating with people and letting them know and really, helping people to kind of understand what you're going through on their side, but just creating a really fun experience. And then of course, just the communication and management that has to happen at your employee level, right? You've got your servers and things like that are out in front of face for people. And then you have your chefs in the kitchen that are just grinding so hard and working really, really hard. So to be able to manage that relationship of two very, very different dynamic personalities, it's definitely hard. But again, I think that's where those soft skills really come into play of just really enabling people to see each other as humans, right? Like we're not robots. We don't just kind of like clock in, clock out, put our heads down, do the work. I actually am we hear that a lot of like, put your head down and just, get to work. And I actually hate that phrase. I think that, as employees and as people, we should always keep our heads up. They should always be kind of like looking around, seeing what the things that are coming at you and seeing the things that are forward. I just always encourage people to keep your professional blinders on too, right? Remember that, to continue to focus not only on yourself, but focus on those different people that can really help, drive you forward, right? So when we think about something like the restaurant industry, it's important that, you are keeping yourself in mind for like where you want to go with your career, and how you want to show up at work, but then also really valuing those people and those networks around you, because those will definitely come back to pick you up, in the moments that you need.
I can appreciate that. I don't want to get too far into your presentation, but that whole emotional intelligence, that EQ factor that we're hearing a lot about now, it's such a key to success, not only in work-life balance, but kind of managing your career as well. So I can appreciate what you're saying there. Let's keep it going.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you, a big stumbling block for me, right? Like, as you kind of see in my early career, I was in restaurants and I was 100% work. So all of my friends worked there. I oftentimes didn't have days off. I mean, to be honest, I was working sometimes 80, 85 hour weeks. Even on my days off, I had to go in for meetings or meet up with people at work. So, I think for me, it was, I didn't notice it at the time, but I was just so invested. And what do you think happened? I got burnt out, right? So all of a sudden, my mental health started to suffer. I started having panic attacks for the first time in my life. And I really had to kind of take a step back and really take stock of how did I get here, right? I really was talking myself into, I love this place and I love this job. And, really kind of drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will, and making sure that like I was being that influence on all of my employees and really neglecting what was happening to me inside. So I really shifted and I said, you know what, I really need to take an understanding of where I want to go in my career, but more importantly, like what's going on in my life. And that's when I decided, I think it's time for me to resign. And, one of those things, I as you're working sometimes 80, 85-hour weeks, and then, I'm also kind of struggling financially too, right? Like I'm working paycheck to paycheck. I don't seem to be getting a lot of positive reinforcement here for all of this hard work that I was putting in. I decided to resign, and this was a huge turning point for me. It was definitely a very tough time in my life, for sure, where I resigned. And one of the biggest influences in my turnaround was when I went to resign. Typically, standard people give 2 weeks. They asked me for 5 months. And I kind of sat there and I think that's where the light bulb went on, right? Imagine, running a marathon, 26 miles, and you have half a mile left. And somebody says, at, half a mile left, they say, oh, you got another 15 miles to go, right? Where I was running on fumes, and I just looked at him and I said, no, I can't give you 5 months. Respectfully, I think I probably gave, more than I could have, where I said, I'll kind of compromise and give you 2 months, right? Because it was important to me not to let my employees down, right? I learned very quickly that when you're running on fumes, those fumes give out eventually. And within a couple of weeks, I woke up, I had an incredible panic attack. I didn't know what was happening. And I just said, I'm done. At this point, my physical, my emotional, my mental, my whole capacity was just completely depleted. And I think for that, I looked back at it and I said, look, if you're coming to me and asking me for 5 extra months, that's almost half a year. It means that you value me so much in my role, but I don't feel that, right? So I think that as hard as that transition was pinnacle in my career, because I started realizing how much value I had as an employee and as a professional and as a person. And I was working for a company that that wasn't showing up for me from a rewards perspective, from a compensation, and also from a value perspective with my life. Right. So I think that was a huge turning point for me. And again, it was a really, really difficult time, in my life, but I wouldn't change it for the life of me, because it's definitely lended me to where I am today.
I have to ask this. This is the recruiter in me.
Yeah. I can't tell you the company, but
no. That wasn't the question. They asked you to give them 5 months. Was there a completion bonus tied on that?
No.
Oh yeah, that's nope. Not even a conversation.
No, it was really, I think it was playing off of the heartstrings, right? Because they knew that I was so invested in the company. They knew how invested I was in my employees and just the team, that I think it was kind of to them, just like an easy thought of like, oh, she wouldn't just, walk out on us kind of a thing. But, and honestly, like it got to a point where it wasn't even really my choice anymore. Like my body and my mind and my heart and my soul just said, we are done. We're walking away. This is no longer a healthy thing. Emotional manipulation. Exactly. I think that's a fantastic way to put it. And again, I think it's an experience. It's made me a better employee now in my career. It's also made me a better manager as well. Just to make sure that we are constantly putting people first, because I've had the experience of not being put first, and I understand the impact of that.
Well, this is the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series with Shayla Turner from Anheuser-Busch. Listen, we really appreciate the questions. I see a question here from Kwame. We're going to do a Q&A at the end, but please, if you can drop that into the Q&A section so I don't forget it, I really appreciate it. Shayla, keep going.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, for me and Kwame, I may even be able to kind of answer this in this next part. I think for me too, right? Like anytime you're transitioning your career, I'll start out by saying this. When you think of work-life balance, I would be remiss to not, mention that there's a lot of privilege in creating work-life balance, right? And some of us, don't oftentimes have that privilege, especially early in our careers when it comes to finances. Maybe you have kids or a family or parents that you're supporting, so transitioning your careers can be a very risky and scary thing. But I do think that it's really important to really start weighing your options, right? So for me, just kind of coming out and saying, okay, financially, I'm going to be in trouble if I leave this job, but is that what's important, or is my mental and physical health what's important, right? So I luckily had an incredible family support that I was able to lean on. When I decided to call it quits on my role, I called them up and I said, hey, I'm done. This is no longer working for me. And the next day, waking up and saying, oh my gosh, I don't have a life here anymore. My life was so much work that it was really easy for me to say, you know what? I'm going to go back to Oregon and be with family and really spend the next year to 2 years and kind of rebuild myself and what's important to me. So, again, there's privilege in that, right? I had a family that I was able to go back and kind of lean on, whether it be financially or like housing and things like that. And when I did that, I think the biggest thing for me at that transition in my life was to just get rid of any shame that I had. Right. And to go back, and what I ended up doing was finding a couple of different restaurants where I just picked up bartending shifts where I knew I didn't want to get super invested because I wanted to transition my career. But I ended up working for couple of different restaurants, and just kind of bartending and really keeping it at that. And it allowed me kind of the finances, right? Just to kind of keep myself afloat, but also gave me the time to really, really concentrate on, building back my friendships. I lost a lot of friendships, and building back, that time with family spent, and just taking the time for myself to kind of, understand where I wanted to go. So through that, I was able, as I was kind of bartending and stuff, I was chatting with all of our beer distributors, and that's actually how I started with Anheuser-Busch. So I actually started as a sales rep with Anheuser-Busch. And I think during that time is actually where I went into my nonprofit sector, where I created a nonprofit that was focused on event coordination, where we would basically any profit that we made from the event collaboration between like DJs and venues and artists, we would charge covers, and we'd throw these like big day parties. We'd have bartenders, and the bartenders would get tips. All of the tips, all of the finances that we made through that, we would actually invest back into the community. So I would work with some different nonprofits, and we basically were kind of like a funding effort for different nonprofits of bringing people together through just drinking and playing and having fun. So I was doing that, as I shifted into sales, the sales world. And, I think that's again, to me, where I was spending so much time and so much of my personal finances and resources kind of keeping that nonprofit afloat, that I had to, decide, all right, now I'm doing it again, right? I'm going head first, and just too many things, trying to do everything all at once. Let me really focus on just, establishing myself in my career, establishing my finances, and very quickly I learned that AB was a company that I could feel really, really connected to in terms of its mission, and really, really building out my career and where I wanted to go. So I stopped doing the nonprofit, which I think was in turn just a really positive thing. This also, happened to be like right before the pandemic hit. So I think I was able to transition at a really, really great time out of the restaurants and nonprofit world and into corporate sector. So yeah, I was a sales rep for about 2.5 years, and I was good at it, right? Because I was a GM for a restaurant, so I knew how to talk beer and sell beer. But I knew very quickly that sales was not for me. So wanted to shift out of that and more into possibly the people space. I think sales for me too, it was kind of a transition in my life where I had to find that balance of, you have to be on all the time and that extrovert and really building those relationships. And it was a transition in my time where I started finding out I'm a bit more of an introvert than I really thought that I was. So I think working really, really hard and just, making sure that I was promoted based off of merit finding a position here in St. Louis as a university operations coordinator. I was doing talent acquisition, running our team here, in charge of all of the recruitment events, our selection process, our onboarding for our talent programs. I did that for about 2.5 years. And that is really where I took my experience back in the day and saying, I get so invested in work, but where do I start building my boundaries, right? And understanding a huge boundary that I said was, I'm not working weekends, right? Like, so how do I start working on my time management to make sure that my Monday through Friday, I can really get all of my job done and done very well. And I think that's where I'll talk about it a bit more in the slides, is where you really need to schedule your priorities rather than prioritizing your schedule. So that's definitely where I learned, early on of how to create that balance, when you do want to do your job and do it well.
I saw that quote in your slides. I think that's an amazing quote. So looking forward to learning a little more about the way you put that into practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're probably running short on time here, so I'll just kind of quickly wrap up with my current. Again, I think that transition into the talent acquisition space in the corporate sector and saying, okay, what were my lessons learned, and kind of reflecting back on how I got burnt out and really making sure that I was concentrating on the things that would help me do that. So I was getting burnt out because I literally worked every single day. So for me, it was really defining, okay, what are my boundaries in terms of hours? If I, here at AB, we don't really have like the strict, 8 to 5 guidelines. Like, do I want to start early and end early? Do I want to start a little, an hour or two late and end late? I'm a night owl. So sometimes at 6 p.m., that's when my brain will just start going and going and going. It's that restaurant in me. So there's times I'll be, working on a project until 11 p.m. Right. But that's because it just feeds me. That's something that I find value in. So that's actually a really good transition into kind of our next session.
Yeah, definitely. And you spoke about a lot of opportunities there at Anheuser-Busch. Listen, if you're in the audience and you're interested in learning more about career opportunities at Anheuser-Busch, please visit Anheuser-Busch.com, hang out, talk to the virtual assistant, Stella, and learn about opportunities there at AB. Next slide, please.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to interact with the audience here a little bit. So I've talked about my journey, but I just would love to kind of get a pulse on where everybody else is in their journey. So when you think about kind of assessing your journey right now, I'd love to understand on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I am all life, work comes last, like I'm only focused on that. 9 being I feel like I'm exactly where you were, Shayla, a couple of years ago, where you were all work. Would love to hear kind of the number that you're at in the audience. 4. All right. Love that. Look at all this balance. Oh, 10. Oh, goodness.
They came off the chart, right?
They did. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, definitely some of those 10s. This session is definitely going to be the one for you, right? So, fantastic. So I see a lot of you with balance. A couple more people, a little bit more on the work end. Again, that may work for you, right? I mean, if you're a 10 and want to be a 10, by all means, like get that hustle, right? But if it is something where you're saying, all right, I'm a 10, but I'd really, really love to be that 4, that 5, that 6, let's talk about some of those applicable things, that I can give you to maybe just start thinking about, how to help you prioritize. Awesome. So, first and foremost, I mean, let's talk about the obvious, right? I think the recent pandemic has influenced a lot of us. I think just in the way that we think about life. I'm sure everybody on this call has heard about the Great Resignation, that happened through 2020 and 2021. And, I've done a lot of reading and things like that on that. And we were actually just fortunate enough to hear from an economist more recently. And, I think when you really look at the data, it's actually, it's not this like crazy, idea that people are really not necessarily like just resigning and not going back to work, but I think people are just reflecting more, right? They're looking at their current job and starting to kind of sit back and say, okay, through the pandemic, I've learned really what's important to me and how do I really build that balance for myself of focusing on what's important, not just in life, but then in work too, right? So that's kind of going to be my next prompt to you all to really think, and this is really where you should start when you're thinking about work-life balance, is what's important to you? Where do you find joy? Where do you find purpose? Where do you find value? And what I'd like you to do is really think about work separate from life, right? We know oftentimes they do intersect, but for the purpose of this, I would really love you to kind of think about those two things separately as we're going through this exercise. So really starting out with work, thinking through what's really important to you when you show up to work, right? So I can tell you for myself, huge things for me are being in a workplace that has an inclusive environment, meaning that I can show up as myself. I can be coached, as a professional, but people understand who I am as a human first. That's a huge, huge priority for me. Growth and development. I love being challenged. I love being pushed out of my comfort zone. Even when I don't want to, after about a week or so, I'm like, okay, good. Now I've grown. Flexibility, right? So actually, if you look at this, I actually separated out flexibility and remote work because those to me are two very, very different things. I think remote work means that you truly are working from home, but that does not oftentimes mean more flexibility. Flexibility to me means, I think, working with a management team, a leadership team that understands that you do have life outside of work, right? So if you've got a doctor's appointment, if your kids are sick, being able to kind of adjust your schedule, based off of your lifestyle, that works for you, right? In getting your success of your job done. Goal achievement. So those are things that really work for me. Would love to kind of hear in the chat. And of course, there are tons of things on here with work that are important that are not on here. So would love to kind of hear from the group about the different things when you show up to work, what's important to you. Really start reflecting on that.
You were speaking about the time between, like people aren't just resigning with no plan to go back to work, but some people are in a pivot, right? They're looking to pivot because they've maybe taken a different view of what's important to them career-wise. And then within that pivot, oftentimes there may be some certifications or things of that nature, any type of professional development that they look to acquire during the pivot. And sometimes that takes time, but their plan is indeed to come back to the workforce.
Definitely. Yeah. And certainly I think that again, like there's no shame in that game at all. Right. And I think that oftentimes, and I keep jumping ahead, but we so often hear about kind of this like hustle culture and always being on and always, money, 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 and, status, and these kind of things, that it's okay, no matter what age you are, no matter where you're at in your career, to stop and say, you know what, I want something different for myself. I want to invest in myself. And if that means going back to school or getting a different certification, do it, right? Like, don't take somebody's potential opinion of yourself and let you hold back from that, right? I think the transition is a really, really tough period because oftentimes with transition, like people can oftentimes like they failed. And I think that for me, I always say failure is okay as long as you're failing forward, right? So what did you learn from that failure? And then how do you move forward from it? So very similar to kind of my experience, right? I think that first couple of months as I transitioned, it was dealing with that shame of failure of, wow, I didn't do right by my employees. I left this company that I've invested in for so many years of my life. I feel like a failure. And I think now I can look forward and look where I'm at now, talking to you all about how I found that work-life balance, and it really, all of those things kind of come to fruition together. So I definitely encourage you, make those investments in yourself if that's what's important to you.
Well, while we're here real quick, I want to take two questions out of the Q&A, but how do you define balance? That's coming from Kelly, but also Kobe. These slides, the actual video will be available on the Urban League Jobs Network YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and search Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series, you'll find this and all of the other DCSSs. This one will probably be available in a few days. So thank you so very much for the interest. So how do you define balance?
Yeah, really fantastic question. I actually have our Webster dictionary on a slide a little bit, but I joined a leadership session a couple of years ago when I was managing, and we were talking about work-life balance, and they were kind of, prompting me just about like how I felt balance was. And what I was describing in my life was really, ensuring that I had flexibility, right? So if on a Monday something was happening with a friend or a family, I could really concentrate a lot of my effort on that and adjust my schedule as necessary, right? Adjust my priorities and do that on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. I think just being able to adjust based on what's happening in your life, because we should all understand, right, that the height of what's going on in your life is oftentimes, maybe when you can take a little bit of time away from work, or vice versa, right? Maybe you have a huge presentation due, with your CEO, right? That's going to be a huge priority for you. What can you kind of shift in your life, that day or that week to make that adjustment? So maybe it's just working an extra hour here or there. Maybe it's, saying no to, to something, to another request that's coming through. So I think that's a big thing for me, of just understanding that shift that has to happen really on a daily basis. So as I was kind of talking about that, the instructor said, well, Shayla, what you're saying actually sounds more like harmony, right? Like just this fluid motion, and understanding that sometimes life is going to, take a bit more priority, and work is going to take more priority. So you really have to be fluid and flexible, even within your own life and your own schedule. And also not, don't be afraid to say no to some things too, right? You cannot be everything to everybody all the time. So that's why, this exercise of understanding what's important to you at work, what's important to you in life, is so critical to do on a regular basis, right? Because it shifts. In my life, I think back in the day in my early career, family is important, right? But it wasn't my number one. I mean, I missed holidays. I missed, activities with friends. I missed vacations because work was a huge priority to me too, right? So now as I kind of shift, I've rethought about the different things that are important to me in my career, and family has gone up to that number one spot. My friends have gone up to that number two spot. And then I've got work as my vehicle and catalyst for being able to have all of the rest of these joys in my life. So it's important to take stock and to continue to pivot and really think about what's important to you at different points of your life based on the season of life that you're in.
I appreciate that perspective. Are you ready to move to the next slide?
Let's do it. Let's do it. Awesome. All right. So I know we talked a little bit more about work, but really shifting into life, right? Like really challenge yourself to think about, where do you find that joy? Where do you find that happiness, that success? What are the things that drive you, right? For me, like I said in my beginning, something that I find a lot of value is just being near water. Like it sounds so silly, but it's how I cleanse, I think, my spirit and my energy. So I think that goes to me with a lot of travel. I love being able to travel. Of course, with travel, does come some finances, so that's also what helps drive me at work, right? Money is a big thing for me. So, because it helps kind of drive, a lot of the different things. I miss water in Denver. That was the hardest thing being in Denver for me, is missing the water. So yeah, really think about, right? Like, is it you really enjoy going to therapy weekly? Okay. If you enjoy therapy weekly, can you talk to your boss? Maybe it's, on a Wednesday at noon. Can you talk to your boss? Can you talk to your job and say, hey, this is really important in my life. I really want to prioritize this. How can I shift some priorities at work to make sure that I can, take care of my mental health every week? If it's exercise, if it's health, your family, your kids, your parents, really, really sit down and take stock of what's important to you at your current state. And again, making sure that you're kind of revisiting that list, because ultimately, in most cases of work, I hate to say this, but you can be replaceable, right? And in life, you cannot. So really life, I think for me personally, always has to take precedent over everything else. And if work is not something that supports that, then that's just not the job for me. And I think that's that boundary, that very hard boundary that I've had to maintain over the course of my career journey to ensure that I was really being true to myself and I'm the happiest and healthiest version of myself, so that then when I show up to work, I can be that person and I can really, help the company, help the employees, show up to be the best versions of themselves as well.
Yeah, we need you here. So focus in on
anytime. I'm here for you.
Next slide.
Awesome. So just an amazing quote here from Oprah Winfrey. I've learned that you can't have everything and do everything at the same time. So again, I've spoke to this a couple of times throughout this session, and this is something that just resonates with me so much, because if anybody is like me, I am a yes woman. I love to tell everybody yes when they ask. I really want to be that support and not just, because I want to be a people pleaser, but I actually genuinely get some joy out of being that person for people. And, again, that's the shift that I had to make, in the middle of my career of saying, I can't keep saying yes to everybody and also yes to myself. So let me take care of me first. And in doing that, I'm then able to create space and energy for other people as well.
Yeah, extremely important. Extremely important to kind of be mindful of what it is that you really can say yes to and no to, and be willing to say no to things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. I don't want to spend too much time just because I know we got Q&A sessions towards the end. But, I do want to mention, I think, as you see it on social media, you see it, kind of everywhere. I think this generational shift that we're seeing, and there's a lot of, I think, falsities to some things and, extremes to others, but we're definitely kind of starting to see this generational shift, over the last couple of generations of hustle culture, right? You see those memes that are like, no days off and like work hard, play hard and things like that. And certainly if hustle is your game, like no shame in that game at all. I would definitely never fault anybody for that, but it doesn't work for everyone, right? It's okay to have peace. It's okay to have rest and not feel guilty about it. So I think those are a lot of conversations that we're really starting to see. And then on the flip side of that, right, I think especially coming out of the pandemic, we hear about the Great Resignation. Now all of these different things are coming out about the anti-work movement. I think I'm not a professional in either of these things, but I do think that they're really important to see and educate yourself on what these things mean in general, but then also mean to you, right? So when we think about anti-work movement, that could be somebody saying like, these kind of jobs like should not exist and they're demeaning and demoralizing and, these different things. Or it could also mean, I really want to work for something that adds a lot of value to me personally, right? And anything else, it just doesn't fit that. So whether that be, focusing on travel or, are you primarily focused on how much money you can get like within a role? I think these are just really great prompts to understand how you want to interact with the workforce, right? And how do you take advantage of the privileges that you do have to make sure that workforce is also in effect working for you?
Yeah, definitely. And just, people understanding that you can work smarter as well to kind of alleviate some of these.
Yes.
And come in the middle instead of on either side, right?
Exactly. I think that's where I am, Ken. I am definitely a huge fan of the work smarter, not harder. If I can get done in 4 hours, what somebody else can get done in 8, I'm taking the rest of that 4 hours for me. So
there you go. And you deserve it.
Exactly. Awesome.
All right, are we going to the next slide?
Yeah. All right. So fantastic, to our previous question, just kind of the difference of these both, right? I don't think either are right or wrong. I think it's just really important to kind of understand how these do impact you. Because when we think about balance from, the more technical standpoint, right? We think about something that is truly, truly balanced and doesn't shift. So I think that for me is where my mindset did really shift to that more harmonic, piece of my life, right? Of understanding that, like, how do you really build out this rhythm where both aspects of your life can support one another, right? So when I have something going on, really important, whether it be good or more traumatic in my family, how can I ensure that, my business, my career is enabling me to support that, right? And I do think that has to do with your management. It's probably, Ken, why I'm just so focused on making sure that I show up with that support for my own employees, to make sure that they understand, like, if things happen and life happens, what are the things that we can deprioritize at work to really make sure that they maintain that harmony, so that they don't fall, right? I think that's a really big important step.
Definitely.
All right. And
go.
Again, I already talked to this quote as well, but the key is to not prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. So again, it just, not being afraid to say no, and really, a couple of slides back, when you're thinking about, what's important to you when it comes to work, what's important to you when it comes to life, whether that takes you a few months, a few years, even to really understand how to create that balance, it's okay to take that time. And again, they're going to shift seasonally throughout your life. So just really important that you are prioritizing that, and determining your boundaries, right? What works for me as a boundary may not work for you as a boundary. So it's important to kind of understand, what are your non-negotiables, right? What are those things that you say, okay, I am absolutely not working past 5 p.m. Okay, well, maybe you shouldn't go into an industry, that you have to be there until 9 p.m., right? So, really, really try to think about those things and kind of think about your North Star of a boundary, and really start kind of like working towards that goal. I think for me, it was a matter of, okay, I see my value now, but what's going to be important to me 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do I have the autonomy and the capabilities right now to build myself into, where I want to be, in another 5 or 10 years, right? So right now I'm saying, you know what? I can work a couple of extra hours. Like, I can work on this presentation until 11 p.m. because ultimately I know that it's going to, help my career growth, so that I get to, that next level of being able to kind of control my destiny of my hours and things like that.
I'm glad you mentioned Stephen here on this. If people aren't familiar with his work, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, first things first, like, please lock in on some of that. I think they're great reads, and they speak to a lot of what Shayla's talking about with the work-life balance piece. All right, let's move forward.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is one of my last slides. But again, just to really build out some of those more sustainable like tips, for you to concentrate on. So one, just again, defining your purpose. So this isn't a static idea, right? So what my purpose is today could really shift even next year into 2023, into 2024. So it's important to just continue to take stock of the purpose and the value that you have, focusing on your priorities. So if anybody has heard, like, really thinking, inch wide, mile deep, right? Because we cannot show up and be everything for everybody, especially when we're neglecting ourselves. So really thinking about, how can I focus my priorities and really, really dive into that, so that I can create that healthy balance. Adjusting per season, right? So I don't mean season weather-wise, just the seasons of life, the chapters of life. So just really, kind of stopping yourself every now and again and saying, okay, am I in the same headspace? Am I in the same, physical space that I was 6 months ago even? Do I need to redefine, what my goals are, what my boundaries are, what my priorities are? And then, creating those achievable and sustainable boundaries too, right? So again, I explained, like, if you are, if your heavy non-negotiable boundary is to not work past a certain point and you just want to clock in and clock out, maybe something like the restaurant industry isn't for you, right? Because oftentimes you get busy and then you have to stay a couple extra hours or things like that. So, just making sure that as you are searching for your next career, you're thinking about what are your non-negotiables before you go into that career, just to make sure that they do match up and align, and then adjusting those as necessary. And also communicating them. That's a really big thing. Just making sure that, when you are building out your career, your team, your direct reports, your manager, all understand what your priorities and your boundaries are too, because it will allow them to acknowledge, understand, and even support those boundaries for you.
All right, I know we're running a little long here. So I know there's a Q&A, but there's also a QR code that you have, I believe,
yes,
that allows people stay connected with you. So
yep.
let's jump into the Q&A real quick. Awesome. So, man, we're on rapid fire right now, Shayla. So
yeah, not a problem. I'm sorry, I was long-winded.
No problem. We appreciated the feedback and the info. How do you prioritize tasks you don't enjoy, but that are necessary?
Really, really great question. I think the first thing that I do is, and I deal with this a lot in HR. As you can imagine, we're kind of the one-stop shop for everything, right? So I think one, I look at the questions and the tasks that are happening, and then look at the different resources that I have at my disposal to kind of shift those resources. Maybe that is, finding a resource that can provide a quick answer, faster than I can. Maybe it is leaning on a team member, but really looking, I think it also for me, in my role, depends on, who that ask is coming from as well, right? And I don't mean from a hierarchy standpoint, like a VP's, task is just as important as one of my entry level employees. I think it's around the urgency. So one of the things that I really do is I ask, clear understanding of what is your timeline for this, right? If you're giving me a task and I say, what's your timeline? Oh, get it to me tomorrow. I can't do that. I have all of these other priorities. So let me give you a realistic one, and then we can kind of negotiate that space. So I think, again, it's really building that communication.
Got it. Are there any tools or technologies that you use, either tech or manual, that allow you to stay organized and maintain harmony?
I am very old school. I love checklists. If my mother is listening, I don't know if she's on here, but she has a thing that she taught me called punch lists. So I have definitely adopted that. I'm a big fan of just creating kind of my action list throughout the day and just being able to check them off one by one. I get a lot of joy out of that. I've been trying to not waste paper and go to more of an Excel file. So I'm definitely a data nerd. I love being in Excel and, putting my lists in there as well. So that's what works for me. Doesn't work for everybody. I know there's a lot of incredible technology out there, but I think I'm not the most platform tech savvy person there is.
That works. Listen, Liz, we're unable to share the Harmony slide again, but you can visit the UL Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series page on YouTube, and this presentation will show up there probably within the next few days. Let me get another question in before we jump out. Let's see. How do you let your manager know that they are micromanaging you and they don't realize it? I need you to be quick on this, although that's a bullet question.
That is a big question. I think honest communication. I think it's really, just to let them know, say, hey, this is what I feel like I'm capable of. Is there something that I am not doing that's not meeting your expectation? And can you communicate that with me so that I can take that time back from you, right? That you don't feel like you have to constantly follow up. So I think simply asking is the biggest thing, because oftentimes that's where there's just a miscommunication, and just really making sure that you're clearing that up.
Got you. We really appreciate you today. I'm sorry to rush you through the Q&A.
That's okay.
Listen, if you want to stay connected with Shayla, pick your phones up, please. Scan the QR code, and I'm sure that'll take you to her LinkedIn profile. Yes, also, all things Anheuser-Busch. Visit the website, anheuserbusch.com. Talk to Stella, the virtual assistant there, and gather that information as well. All right. If you want to stay connected with me, here's my contact information. We did it again. This is another year of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. Today, we'd like to thank Shayla Turner. We'd like to thank the Anheuser-Busch Foundation for sponsoring this and several other Digital Career Success Series. We appreciate you. This concludes our DCSS series for 2022. I'd like to thank all of you for your participation, and we look forward to bringing new relevant professional and career development webinars to you in 2023. Again, if you've missed anything on this session or any of our other sessions, please feel free to rewatch the webinars on our YouTube page. I'd like to personally thank Wanda Jackson, Senior Vice President of Human Resources for the National Urban League, for this opportunity and for leading us. Dory Brown, you're amazing. You continue to do great things. The entire National Urban League team, Dave Gannon, Kanji, Adanya, Tiffany, everybody's been amazing, and you guys have been a great support. But most importantly, I'd really like to thank you for joining us each and every week for the Digital Career Success Series. It's been a great year. I'd like to thank past guests for their support and just for bringing their information and insight onto the platform. My name is Kenneth L. Johnson. Hope to see you again next year for another year of the Digital Career Success Series. Thank you so very much, Shayla. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, and happy holidays to everyone.